Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Trainee? Oh, he's no longer
Huh.
Oh. Mr.
Pour out some
Peterson?
coffee.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay. Wait, did you get?
So there's 3. So I haven't had an updated list of who's been put on committees
Okay.
yet.
So we'll go
Are you
around
guys on?
and then just speak. So you, just for new people, we record these meetings. So I guess for everybody in here, we record the meetings. So should you speak, give your name, and remember to make sure you enunciate towards that little black box there. For people who are new here, this is an opportunity for assembly members mostly, because we have to speak in public and it's open and you guys can be here, about the various issues. But when there's time, if you have something to add, just raise your hand, and generally somebody will kind of point you out, but wait to get recognized. And then when you speak briefly, because we had a lot of stuff on our agenda. We want to make sure we can get through it. And there's nothing that we do at this meeting that's final either. We kind of prepare things, but it'll go through, full public processes, as the regular assembly meetings, which provides us more opportunity for people to speak. So let's go around and start with, did you feed us who you called?
I'm not on the committee. Felix Rivera.
Meg Zalato.
Pete Peterson. Dean Gates, City Council.
Chris Schutte, Economic Community Development Director. Ryan Yell, Planning Department.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Crystal Kennedy, Assembly.
Okay, let's go around the perimeter too. And if some of you, we have several issues here. We got the on-site consumption and a couple licenses. You might say real quickly which one you're for, just so I can size it up a bit.
I'm Richard.
Dave Robertson, Gina Ashton, San Diego.
Dave Whitfield, current planning manager.
NCR, Municipal Attorney's Office. Roll call, Asbury Ricks. Katie Stephens. Marge King, American Wine Association.
James Thornton, Senior Director.
Terry Kerrigan, Alaska Marijuana Industry Association.
Chelsea Foster, Keith Location. Michelle Delapadian, Chef Bombshell.
Rob Thompson, still permitting and engineer.
John Yels, Tundra Company.
Bonnie Lamb, Tundra Herb Company.
Tyler Russell, Tundra Company.
Sarah Oak, Galactica. Darcy Harris, Anchor Health Department.
And Jesse Hickman, Agriculture Department.
Eugene Carl Haveman, I represent myself.
Craig Rich, Connect Glacier Gardens.
Kathy Gleason, Trinity Community Council, here for mainly on-site consumption.
Natalie Wilson, Assembly Council's Office.
All right, thanks.
Can we adjust the agenda and take up the item on violations first so that our inspectors can get on with their day?
Yeah, let's go. Anyone else? Anything on the agenda? The Alaska Alchemist, the owner and his representative are not in town, so I'd like to just postpone that to future meeting, and that was mostly just a report to see where they were on progress. Okay. Okay, so we'll take that off. Mandy, so there's a comment that this agenda was not posted.
Oh,
Was it posted?
No.
it wasn't?
No.
Oh, okay.
Check on that.
I will check on that.
I didn't look myself. Okay, so we're gonna 2D. We'll skip, and we're going to move C to right now. Okay, so marijuana establishment or facility violations. Who's Rich?
The first violation was last week. They had they did not have their shelf spot inspection done. They got that.
No, just speak a little louder, please.
Okay, yeah, they resolved that, they got their inspection done, so it really resolved quite quickly. Alaska since, it was, that's the ongoing inspections, we've been conducting the internal inspections and internal and external inspections. They did have an odor issue that was brought to our attention on the 3rd and the 4th, by the state of Alaska, and it was kind of odd because we've been conducting daytime inspections and they detected odor after business hours. So we really weren't sure what was going on, so we recommended that they engage a mechanical engineer, which they did right away. And it was actually Mr. Thompson, and he discovered there was a room that they're using differently. It didn't change the floor plan, but they had marijuana in that room where they didn't have it there before. And at the end of the day, when they would close the door, it would pressurize that room different, and that's where the leakage was coming from. So And I know Mr. Thompson has some other issues that he's addressing there, so I think they, as soon as it was brought to their attention, they engaged an engineer and are on, I think, where we want them to be as far as being in compliance. But I think we have one more month with them to conduct the internal and external inspections, and I have to say, getting nothing but good cooperation. The third and final one was Gringo, the old AH building down on Post. It was the same thing. I know the state folks had noticed some over there. We did also. They did some work on the roof, sealing the buildings, and new filters. And I've gone down there for the last week, but it was most of the odor was in the morning. So I've been going down there every morning for the last 2 weeks, and I've yet to smell odor again. So I think that's resolved. So all of the issues that we've had and we've detected, we've gotten good cooperation and have been resolved without having to actually go to enforcement action.
Great, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, so you referred to an action or a violation on the 3rd that was referenced by the state? Is that the 3rd of this month?
Yes.
Is that why it doesn't show up
Yes.
here
Yeah.
because it's due current?
Yeah, it's brand new and we've been monitoring it. I got Mr. Thompson on there, so we'll see the next month's report.
So maybe there's one more column to add or note in here when the item has been before the committee. Maybe we can find a way to note it on here so that when it comes back around, people know we've already talked about it. There's a record of that. And so we don't rake them over the coals over something we've already heard.
Do you keep track of that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else on this for us?
So, I'm trying to think again, the interaction between, so there's a much longer list here of state violations.
Right.
Right? And to what degree do you see those and then follow up? Because if these are state violations, then they sort of, definitionally are also municipal violations, correct?
Right. Traditionally, and we've talked about this before, that if it's something they discover, we leave it to them, so we don't have basically two different agencies enforcing on the same issue.
Well, I appreciate that we're getting this list, and it helps us sort of understand where the industry is, and also, hopefully avoid the large violation like we had last year that sort of comes out of the blue. I'm reading through these violations from the state. There are many more of them. Most of them seem to be odor, which I think we know is a struggle, but doesn't rise to the same level as malfeasance, I think, typically. The one on here that maybe piques my interest a little bit is on the one from Satori on February 5th. IDs were not being checked upon entering the facility. Do you know anything else about that, or
I don't.
you follow up on it?
I don't.
I mean, it says no actions were taken, so I assume that does that mean they didn't receive a fine, or is that a different kind of action?
I'm not sure what they're doing. If they're just leaving it, I know they do a notice of violation, if they expect a reply back. And I'm not sure what they did in that circumstance.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
We've also got the next one. Package shipped to Rainforest Cannabis was not listed on the manifest for transport.
Self-reported though.
Valid transport. Unapproved ID check station. So with something
So
like
again.
non-checking IDs, that seems like a big deal. Potentially someone 2019, 18 could come in. Or we don't follow up, or is there some way we can find out more from the state?
We can start, I guess, getting their responses or what their follow-ups are, I guess. Do that.
I would suggest there's an alternative path. It would be great to get their reports and we have full information. What I would suggest is, after we've seen this list, if there are ones that jump out as, well, that looks more serious than others, that we would then invite them to come before the committee and give us a brief on what happened and why. so that we can have a full briefing.
I could say also, I mean, in that case, an email might also, if they want to do an email first to the
Yeah.
committee, that might be enough, and then if we want to ask more, call them.
Yeah.
But you just pointed this out, John, that was the same place, Satori. Back in January, they had the unapproved ID station, and then in February, they weren't checking IDs. I think that's enough that I would like to hear from them in some capacity.
Yeah, I don't know that you'd have to do it for everyone.
No.
So maybe that's, I mean, our purpose here is to
Yeah.
say what jumps out to us, and I think not checking IDs jumps out to me for quite a lot, so.
Just looking at it, it says they weren't checking the IDs upon entrance, so
Right.
they might have been checking the IDs when they were purchasing.
And what it
So that
says-
doesn't mean they weren't IDing people.
Yeah, and what it says here, Mr. Peterson, you're right to read that under the action taken for the violation on 117. It says ID checkpoint was moved to the approved location as of February 5. And so it's reasonable to contemplate that they had their check at the wrong spot, inside and not outside. And
Right.
so that's where an email could clarify, and if we don't like that, then visit.
But essentially, every plan we've seen has people checking ID when you enter, and if they're not doing that, and that's in their plan. So I want to know, I mean, the deal isn't you check before you sell. I mean, when we look at the plans, that's the typical layout, right?
We're actually required to do both. They'll give us both check and not allow anyone under 21 to enter the premises. And then we also check at the point of sale as well.
And tell them, take what you're.
This is John, straight on the campus.
So in this case, you'll email the state and get more details?
Yeah.
Is that what-
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. You could either do the state, or we could reach out directly to the business.
Oh.
I would be satisfied with either one. But again, just thinking about how we got here, why we're doing these reports, it's sort of so we don't get blindsided by a major offense. In reading this, again, it seems like this is all pretty standard. There's nothing that seems to rise to that level. And I'm not suggesting that this is like not checking IDs is the crime of the century. But I would like to learn more, whether it comes from the state or from the retailer. Either way, I think would be great.
I don't know, I don't want to beat them up twice, like the state already ended up beating them up, maybe we're happy with that, we don't want to.
I'll just get better information from the state, so we can find out what their problem is.
Okay, just on this one.
Yep.
I think in general, it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to have some information that way. Get here, if there's other questions, I'll have the answers for you. Instead of saying, I'll get back with you.
Okay, I think to some extent, but you've got 20 or more here.
Yeah, I
And
want
that's- So you start really ramping up your work for stuff that they may have taken care of fairly well, kind of like in your case, you took care of it.
I actually agree with John. I think it's fine for you not to have the answers right away. I want to protect your staff time, and so I think we get a chance to review it at the committee. Something jumps on, we tell you, and you follow up on that one. I think that's better than you having to chase them all down.
I would say if they find marijuana on the ground around the dumpster, jump on that, right? Something like that, or clear evidence of an underage person.
If you have them on security camera taking stuff out of a dumpster
That day you find
for
it.
an inspection,
Okay, so what we'll do is, this is a good report, and if something jumps out to us, then you can follow up
Yeah.
after that. So you'll email them, and then when will you get back to us? You want to just email me then, and then
Sure.
I'll schedule it for the next meeting.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, good. Anything else on this? Crystal?
Thank you.
Nothing any further.
Right.
No problem there.
Better
Okay.
now,
So, moving back, we'll do 2A, Tundra Herb Company. Who's here for that?
Right here, sir.
Do we have 3 seats over there?
We do not.
I have another, you guys.
Okay, so welcome. Reiterate your names again.
Tyler Russell.
John Yels.
Okay. Okay. Welcome. So, Mandy, do you want to go through the licensing side?
So for Tundra Herb Company, this is the retail license. The licensing restrictions and requirements were all addressed in their operating plan. There weren't any taxes, fees, or fines found due by any of the licensees or affiliates. All of the safety and security standards were addressed in their operating plan. There were no additional comments from the health department, and there are no extra conditions recommended to be placed on the license.
All right, thank you. Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can keep this one brief. The applicant, Tundra Herb Company, is applying for a special use permit for a marijuana retail sales establishment to total approximately 1,666 square feet of space within an existing commercial use building. The proposed facilities within the B2A district will be the downtown district, generally located southwest of the intersection of West 6th Avenue and East Street. Proposed hours of operation are Sunday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. The application and supporting documents show business that has been deemed compatible with surrounding land uses. The planning department recommends approval of special use permit subject to the conditions as stated in staff.
All right, thanks. And the conditions were few. Any comments? Did you, Megan, Crystal, did you get the packet?
Just now.
You just got it now, okay. Because I think generally for people on the committee, or if you request them, I guess, that fairly thick one that we don't publish in your mailbox at the clerk's. Any comments?
On the license or the land use or either?
Either.
You know, this location, if I might address the content, has long been discussed being converted since probably way back at the beginning of the licensing process. And I'm glad to see that the building is coming back into use. There were no objections from the Downtown Community Council. And
Okay, thank you.
What was located there previously?
the outfitter, right across from the park strip, there was like a sporting goods store, but next to Pangea.
Oh, okay.
You know, just to the west of Pangea.
All right.
So,
It's on the
Sixth
floor.
Avenue Outfitters.
Will it be both floors or just
No,
upstairs?
just the downward downstairs.
Just
down.
downstairs, yes.
Will there be another business upstairs?
Right now, they're retaining that space for their
Storage.
storage.
okay, is that a couple things, Pete, did you, jumped out? One thing is, your staff report said 1,666 square feet, and it may seem small, the lease said 1,600 square feet. And at some point, if you expand, there's a trigger to come back to us, so those few square feet you want to watch.
It's a difference between actual footprint of the store itself and the usable space.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah,
Thanks.
that's good to say.
Okay, so you were watching every foot of that?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Trip you up.
Every foot's money.
Okay, then you have the downtown committee council meeting was July of 18. Your MOU was signed February of this year, so that's a big 7-month gap.
Yes, I think we started on the downtown partnership early. We wanted to make sure we were in good standing with them. We actually went to several meetings. We were only required to do one, I think, but we were there, 3 times? I think, yeah. We just want to make sure everybody is together.
Okay, the back.
They had a copy of it at that meeting, but we didn't get the signed copy because they were out of town until later. They got a copy at that meeting, but we didn't have a signed copy from them. I had to get in touch with them and get that.
This took 7 months.
Well, no, we didn't realize about the signed copy until we came in and talked to Ryan, and he asked for that, and we got it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Just so the record is clear, it wasn't the downtown partnership, it was the downtown community council.
Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies.
Okay. Then it's an odd thing, it only jumps out because I know the guy, but you said in there, in the MOU, it says your contact with Solid Waste Services is Mike LaJoy. And I know Mike LaJoy, I don't think he's ever worked for Solid Waste Services, and he doesn't work there now. But it's, in your MOUs, I think we probably should not name names, because people move, and you'll probably be there for a while.
Yeah,
Just-
my apologies.
So I gave his phone number, and I checked that phone number, see where it leads. Because if something comes up and the community council calls it, who knows what they'll get.
No, go ahead, sir.
One of the suggested requirements is to name an individual with a phone number.
Have the solid waste services.
Just who you have relationships with. And so we might cull through that process a little bit more tightly, but the whole intent was so that everybody knows who to talk to, and that it's officially recorded. And the idea is from time to time it would be updated. And not that most councils are doing that, but the annual licensing process provides that opportunity. And so, but you're right, it may not be wise to include names of people who are employed by other places.
Well, especially the trash dump guy, you don't know, could be a different trash picker upper every week, you know, so. But you might check that, I don't know how his name got put with that solid waste services.
He was actually recommended to us, as a matter of fact,
Yeah, but he
as our
worked for-
point of contact.
He worked for another trash dumper that doesn't work down there. So,
Yes, and
okay.
we'll correct that. We can absolutely take care of that.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, then there, you got one letter of opposition, which was, I think, you're familiar with that, Brian. And, you know, it was a business owner who said, it's the place to let people get high and the owners downtown have to take care of the problem. So, but I'm actually surprised, my understanding is not long ago, the downtown area was like, we've got enough shops, we want to stop the shop. But we're not hearing that now, or did they give up?
You know, I don't know if I might, Mr. Consul, I don't know that they've given up, but they were frustrated by the process, and there was a demand, like you said, a year or two ago, that some business owners in the downtown wanted a moratorium in the downtown. But they heard very resoundingly that there's no way we would support, I would support, the community council would support a moratorium downtown alone. Why would we restrict the downtown when other areas of town are able to benefit from economic development opportunities? And so, we haven't heard them come back, but I don't think that they are necessarily satisfied. But what we heard from Mr. Yo and saw with his presentation that he provided at our retreat last week is there are major investments happening, changing the landscape and improving whole communities. And so, looking forward to seeing the net impacts of these businesses on properties close by, because the theory is that those property values are raising with the values of these properties. So no active organization against it this time.
So, did you read that letter?
No, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, I hope that you go look at it and go talk to him and let him know what Crystal said.
Well, his main complaint is that there's nowhere to consume marijuana downtown. He said people can't, no one lives downtown, so they're not taking it home, so they're doing it on the street. There's no safe place to consume downtown, is sort of the implication of his letter, which is
We
kind
should
of
invite him
interesting.
to the later part of this meeting. Okay, so anything else on this? Do we have a Crystal, Meg? Have any recommendation?
We approve it.
Got a second?
Second.
Any opposition? Okay, so you've been here before, so when this comes up on Tuesday, I hope that you'd be at the meeting.
Yes, sir.
And we'll bring it up, and we don't make a decision here on how it goes, but we'll say that we reviewed it this meeting, and we recommended approval, and then we'll vote on it.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next item is Raspberry Roots permit modification.
Thank you, Terry. Always a gentleman. Hello.
Mandy, are you on this, or is this just Ryan?
This is Ryan.
For Meg and Crystal, what we do is, since we have a license and a special land use permit, Mandy handles the licensing. So when we do these things, she'll give a report on licensing. And the previous one essentially had no issue, but some will have, they may have fines owing, tax, or whatever, a variety of things. There may be some conditions tied to the license. And then we have that special land use permit, so then Ryan or whoever the staff on, it's typically Ryan, will discuss that. That's how we split this up. So, okay, so Ryan, you want to tell us about this?
All right, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one is, it's been a while since the committee or the assembly has seen a major modification to the special land use permit. So I'll go a little more in depth on this one just to give some background. So Raspberry Roots is applying for a modification in the special land use permit for a marijuana retail sales establishment. The proposed modification will expand the retail licensed premises to a total area of 1,580 square feet. And this is an increase in area by 1,080 square feet, a 216% increase as compared to the existing size of the licensed premises, 500, which is 500 square feet.
Pretty small.
And Raspberry Roots was originally approved by the Assembly on November 15, 2016, for 1,580 square feet of licensed retail space. The the size of the retail space was reduced to 500 square feet through a modification approved by the planning director on February 28, 2017. The previously licensed 1,080 square feet was converted to storage space for products and supplies not containing marijuana. And this modification will essentially return the retail area to its original planned size that was originally approved back in 2016. And for context, this site is located northwest of the intersection of C Street and Raspberry Road, right next to the Fish and Game office. Daily hours of operation are Monday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And as of 11 p.m., 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. As of this writing, there have been no municipal violations. And planning department recommends approval of the modification subject to the conditions as stated in the staff report.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
So, remind me, are you retail only, or are you retail and cultivation together?
And manufacturing, all in
And
one roof.
manufacturing, right, okay. But this isn't going to require any additional construction or renovation because you're just...
I'm just taking down one wall.
And what was the other, I know he mentioned it, but what was the space used for previously?
It actually was empty.
Just empty.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No other questions?
So it was empty. So why'd you make the change from?
Because I couldn't afford to build out the whole space. So we went ultra cheap in a really small space, turned over some money, and now I can actually do it the way I wanted to do it originally.
So when your original application had a larger space, then the director said it was okay for you to shrink it. And how'd that process work out?
It was fine.
You just walk in, say I want to do it, and it was done? Or?
Oh, I mean, we had to go through Ryan and go through the process and fill it out an application, but it went fairly smoothly.
How long did it take?
Oh goodness, I honestly don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, so that might be a good thing.
So interestingly, part of the changes that AMCO has made with their applications due to things like this, you'll see now they have phases. So they're requiring, if you have a situation like this where you have a full building and your intent is to use it eventually, but you're unable to currently, they're having it phased. So you have your ultimate plan and then you have your immediate operating plan so that they don't have to go back and do this stuff.
Okay, because you had to go back to the state then too.
Oh yeah, this has been, yep.
That sounded like a worse, than for the city, so we did better.
Sure, yes, absolutely. You guys are great.
So if the state is proposing or has proposed a streamlined methodology, do our procedures allow for similar streamlining?
We just can't approve anything the state is unwilling to approve. So,
I understand that,
we
but
can't approve
that's
more
that's not the question.
square feet.
If the state is going to allow you to put together Plan A that has phases in it, that doesn't require you to come back to the state, do we have a parallel process where an applicant can put that together, here's our phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3, without having to go through a full site review, administrative review, and all of that?
Yeah, we could easily do that.
But we don't yet have that.
We can. We haven't been posed that question yet, but we can.
Could
I
we?
don't see a reason why we couldn't.
So you can do that within existing?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Would that be useful?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to start letting people know that that's how you should submit stuff. So,
Yeah.
because now we see a retail, and sometimes we can glean from the information, oh, you also have plans for, not you, but an operator may have plans for, manufacturing and cultivation later. So what you're saying here is show me everything at once, that we're only looking
That's
for
different.
retail.
So if you're contemplating a different license type, then you
That's
have
different.
a whole application process. But if you're talking about a different use within the same establishment, same licensed premises, if you have a phased plan, then it seems reasonable that if everybody approves at point A, that would be fine for that single license. I think when you breach into a secondary license, it's a whole other conversation.
Well, and since marijuana businesses are not allowed to get commercial loans from banking institutions, they many times are financing these improvements out of their own pocket. And so there's really no other way to do the development other than to do it a phase at a time as funds become available.
Sure. Dean?
Thank you. I kind of want to get a clear idea of how it would work if you have a phasing plan. I mean, we see this with other developments, plotting and so forth. With this, if it's a single building and you're phasing a single building, then you just have one site plan at the beginning, right? And first have your operating plan, and maybe have phases A, B, and C within the structure. So my question is, maybe A, you've got it all laid out, ready to go, and B and C, you don't have a full plan and all that. And if you're going to develop B and C later, it's really just a minor modification, submitting the floor plan layout, right? That's still required if they don't have those parts. So is that kind of how you think it would work, a minor modification? Which is administrative approval. And it doesn't have to go through the whole process.
That's correct, yeah. So it'd essentially be permitting the shell, the outer shell, and then all of the phases 1, 2, and 3. We could have phase 1 in the initial staff report, and then phase 2 would just be a minor mod because it's within the existing licensed premises area. You still need an inspection to verify security. You still need an inspection to verify the plans that you submitted actually match what you built. So you can't skip that step. But it could definitely be handled administratively down the line once they get their approval from the assembly for the shell.
Okay, Chris?
I might frame it slightly differently than a shell. It's more like a not to exceed with an element that's fully developed, right? And so it could be exceeded by 20% and still be allowable with an administrative site review. But really, you're giving them a ceiling of capacity within their space. But I guess ultimately it has to have a fully functioning area to be licensed, right? And so it's not so much a shell per se, but it's a fully functioning operation, but with room that you can grow, not to exceed. I think that's a slight difference philosophically.
My only input would be not to put some sort of a timeline on it, on the application, because I'm going to assume that 99% of the businesses would conclude that everything takes 10 times longer than you think it's going to. So I would just recommend not putting dates on there.
Can you identify yourself for that?
Oh, Kim Cole.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kathy?
Yeah, Kathy Gleason. Just from a neighborhood community perspective on this, I'm wondering how specific you would need the initial paperwork to show what each phase is likely to entail, so you can then in turn fully communicate to the community councils just what potential long-term cumulative impacts or not, that may be on the community council area that you're located in. Because if phase 1 is, hey, this is what we're doing, it's retail, it's this many square feet, and phase 2, we're not sure yet, but eventually we'll have phase 2 and 3 and 4. But then they don't have to go through each individual, go through to the community council, tell them what phase 2 entails, what they're doing to address potential impacts, et cetera, whether it's parking, odor, whatever the case may be. I'm not sure how that gets addressed, if it's a much more streamlined, this just goes through administration on phase 2, phase 3. How does that look to be accomplished with it from a different perspective than the business perspective?
Thank you, Kathy. So that would be when they come in for their initial special land use permit application, they'd show phases 1, 2, and 3. They're required to submit a scale and dimension floor plan. So at that time, the community council would be routed and copy the application. That would show the grand picture, if you will, of what that facility is intended to look like down the road. But they would just have phase 1 as the initial, this is what we're going to build, but here's the big picture of what we want. So you would get notification of what that end product would look like.
But only at the beginning phase, Kathy Gleason, only at the beginning phase, though, of the process?
Depends what phases 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 look like. We have parameters within code, so if it's 20% or less, it gets approved administratively. If it's above that, it goes through a major modification. So in the initial application is when you would see that grand picture. It's unlikely after that you would get floor plan, just because of the fact that that's already licensed space that they'd be getting approval for. So say they come in with a 10,000 square foot cultivation, but they're only building out phase one, it's 2,000 square feet. You get notification of that 10,000 square feet, and you see what that would look like, but you're not going to be able to see what the 6,000 square foot expansion is, or the 2,000 square foot expansion.
Do we go around and say, Dean, Jeff, and then Chris? That works?
Thank you. I mean, this is very interesting, and I guess the Raspberry Roots experience is brought to our attention how phasing would work, but we're kind of straying from our I don't, with their application specifically. And I think that maybe in our future agenda we can talk more about phasing and how it would work, and how that would be processed.
Right. I think you're right. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Hickman with Health Department. For us, phasing would probably be an issue because when we approve a place, it's as it sits now, and if they change something later, they're going to have to go back through our plan review process and get those changes approved. So we don't generally approve things that are going to be done maybe in 20 minutes or something. It ends when it opens, and then if they change it, then they have to go back through the process.
And what I understood Mr. Yell saying is that there's an administrative review process that would require all of those inspections to be done. It just wouldn't require full assembly action. And so that's the intent behind
We
this
just don't want to
conversation.
get left out because sometimes they forget we're over there.
Oh, sorry. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Chris?
Yeah,
We'll
just to
be
clarify,
much closer.
the existing code already requires certain expansions to go before the body, and built into that is all of the public notice requirements, et cetera. So there are provisions in place, Kathy, for changes like that. It just, there's a % increase threshold that has to be triggered for that. So when there are minor mods, and I don't know your case well enough to know if this was applicable, but for the minor mods of under 20% on a retail establishment, for example, that would not require assembly approval. That's an administrative decision. So community councils in that case would not get any notification because we consider it a minor change. But there are thresholds that exist in the different special land use permits that require your approval, and by extension, public hearing, or public notice, I'm sorry, for community councils.
Thanks. Ron?
This all ties together a little bit with the
Tell us your
building
name
permit.
for the tape.
Ron Thompson. It ties together with the building permit process too. Phasing is required in the building side because we need clear delineations for the inspections on that side. In Kim's case, we submitted the entire build out as a full 6-phase process at the very beginning for all the site parameters. And then each individual, as she gets open, we've submitted the pieces for the building part, and each one of those is individually inspected. And so it's very tough. And so in that, if it's retail, that permit, no matter what phase, no matter what level, all has to go to the health department. So the trigger for retail, which is the only trigger for these, is always triggered on whatever phase on the building permit process it is entailed. And so in Kim's case, we approved the site from the very beginning. We're now she's working and talking about a phase 4 for her retail, or phase 3 even, but it's kind of 3A and 3B because we did the full retail, then she couldn't build it out, so we shrunk it down for building purposes reasons and made it and got it licensed smaller, and then now she's going back to the thing that we had already designed at the building side. So it's a multifaceted, complex issue, but I think that what the state's doing would be ideal if we can mimic that, because then it allows this phasing that's happening in almost every one of the projects that I've worked on for this industry, because it's very difficult to fund a full build out on any one of these. So I think if we make sure that we can follow that phasing and get that approved, it's always better to get it approved up front in a full-blown scenario. Then each time that we get the tenant improvements, it's like a regular building permit. It's simple, instead of how it's been, which has been very difficult for this industry, because each time we have to get a whole full review of the site conditions and all that, where in every other industry we really don't have to.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, I guess in following up on Dean, this might be a bigger issue to look at later. So do you want to give some thought to what it would look like if that happened? And
sure.
Maybe give an example, and then we'll tie in with how it relates to the building code and the health department and community council notice and so on. And just so now, what we're looking at right now, was this sent to the community council as well?
Yes.
This modification. Okay. And then do you go to the community council so you have the whole process, you do public meeting, and so on?
All the letters,
Modify your MOU
everything.
with them, and
Yep.
so on? Okay. Okay, good. So we did stray from the agenda, but that's important stuff that triggers improvement, so.
You're welcome.
So any, so any recommendation on this?
Yeah, move to approve it, move it forward for approval.
Second.
Any opposition? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
See you Tuesday.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Okay, good. So we were noticed till 11. Hopefully we won't go that far because we have a committee meeting at City Hall at 11. I think most of us are on.
Do you want to say about moving AK Alchemist to the next meeting?
Can't hear.
Oh, Alaska Alchemist. I took it off of this agenda. I'm not sure. Next
So,
time. Did you talk
due to
Tommy?
noticing, so we sent out a notice, but I believe you still need to, on the record, say this is going to be.
Oh, we did at the very start of the meeting.
Oh, you did? Oh,
Yeah, they covered it.
Got it. Sorry.
No, thank you though. But I don't know which meeting we'll do that. We'll coordinate with the owner and with Ralph. Is that okay?
That is, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so draft IOs on-site consumption. So who's leading this?
I'll start, Mr. Chairman. We're going to start with the Title 10 changes, which you should all have a copy of, maybe emailed out. This is a clean copy, so a lot of the red lines and comments that existed in previous drafts and the sidebars are gone so that it's easier to read. And we'll walk you through this version of the ordinance and then try and highlight the substantive changes between the last version and this version. There's not many, but we'll cover that. So beginning on page 1, there aren't many changes on page 1. I did see one thing we want to talk about later. This is just laying out the new regulations from the state and how we're going to absorb those into Title 10. Moving on to page 2. This was after some discussion with the committee and with the drafters, and given the de facto practice today of submitting these, both the special land use permit and the licensing to the planning department, we're actually codifying that so that it's clear to applicants and the public. I think we covered that last time, but we went through the document to make sure that that was clearly stated throughout. I think that's it on this page. Mandy, is there anything else that's changed substantially on this page? I don't believe so. Moving on to page 3. Again, this is the section that deals with the application for endorsements, licenses for endorsements. There were no substantive changes on this page. To my knowledge, Manny, I think everything on here was just corrections where it used to say municipal clerk. We were updating it to point to the planning department or planning director. And stop me at any time if you have questions, by the way.
This isn't an underlined section, but they're in E. Do we often reference electronic mail?
Yes.
We do, because it comes to mind there's like someday, who knows, that may go the way of the dodo or the carrier pigeon, and we don't use faxes anymore. So is there a general term, or is that really the best term?
Electronic mail is how it's spelled out throughout the rest of the code.
Okay.
But we can, when we invent this new method of communication, we will update it.
Yeah, exactly. Text message.
Facebook message.
Text
I
message.
actually think that is from the state regs when they first launched the initial regulations.
Thank you.
But they also at the beginning required all of them to submit electronic mail for contact. And I was first time to time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to page 4. Again, not substantive changes, updates to add the endorsements that will be forthcoming to the existing processes for license transfer, et cetera. So if you have any questions on that, these are really just sort of adding endorsements to those processes. Page 5. Again, these are just updates to existing code processes to include endorsements in all of those actions related to protest, et cetera, and public participation. Page 6, this is where we've got a few new items. Public hearing requirements in section C. This is specifically calling out the on-site consumption endorsement as requiring public hearing. There was a very good discussion last week about public notice to surrounding community councils. New letter D really calls out that in cases where public hearing is required, that we're going to send notice of hearing to each community council within 1,000 feet of the proposed location. And so we wanted to single that one out and recognize it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple questions on this one. So first, is that 1,000 feet, is that a normal number? Did we get that from somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay. Then on C, on the renewal, it's my understanding that the way that we're operating right now for renewals is the first time that they're coming back automatically for public hearing. I think we should entertain the idea of doing the same thing for on-site consumption endorsements. Is the first time they automatically come back for public hearing.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, through the way this reads right now is the Assembly will hold a hearing on new on-site app endorsements. In the renewal section later, the Assembly may hold a hearing. So I believe that discretion lies with you.
This May and is that in C here? It's in the field.
Yeah,
And this
letter
is-
C, it's the last sentence of subsection C.
This is mimicking the same language that we did for the license, so it does allow for that, so at your discretion. So we can definitely
that was
do
just
that.
a decision, if I may, Mr. Chair, that we just made. Okay, so we don't need to do anything else.
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, I'm actually, when we made that decision, so the first renewal always comes to us, is that? Are we doing that like ongoing? Or some reason I thought we had like for the first couple of years.
It's ongoing. There was a resolution and there wasn't really an expiration date on it, so I can look into the specifics of it, but I think it's at the discretion of the Assembly.
So, but at this point, it's ongoing, so okay. I don't know if I have a problem with that. Somewhere in the back of my mind was we had some things that we were going to do the first couple of years, but.
Well, maybe I misunderstood what you said. It always comes back to us. The issue is whether there's a public hearing.
But now at the first renewal, automatically,
We do a
Right.
public
presented to
hearing.
us that we don't have to pull it out of the list.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can do the same thing with the endorsements.
Okay.
And would you recommend us passing a resolution to that effect if this were to go into effect?
It would be nice.
Yeah. So, good idea, Felix. I think
Do you want to, Dean, can you do that?
Yes, we can. Why don't we get the resolution and send it to the committee members so we can bring one for endorsements up.
Well,
We'll proceed with that.
Fourth?
that resolution could travel with this, but I mean, it is a little bit premature given that, you know.
That's a good point. Yeah, let's wait. Good point. Thank you.
John Crumpet.
Kathy?
Yes, Kathy Gleason. Could I just get clarification, because I know during this whole, the initial code for allowing retail was at how many feet and from where and how you measure it. When it says 1,000 feet of the endorsed premises, is that lot line or is that the physical structure of the retail location, entrance?
So
Where
it's
do you
a-
start measuring that 1,000?
It's 1,000 feet from the proposed premises, so it would be from the physical location of the proposed license. So for example, if they're in a strip mall, it'd be 1,000 feet from their leased space at the strip mall.
Thank
Big
you.
circle around it.
As the crow flies.
Yes. Crow flies in circles.
Yes, they do. Overhead. Or vulture, as the vulture flies. How's that?
To new members of the committee, we had quite a lengthy discussion about how crows fly, and we went with a straight line. Instead of as crows fly, took a long time.
If you spend any time at the landfill, you see they don't fly in straight lines.
So, thank you, Kathy. Okay, I think we're going back.
Yeah, yes, sir. So that's it on page 6, the 1,000-foot radius. Moving on to page 7. Again, this is mostly clerical updates to add on-site consumption endorsements to existing sections of code. Page 8, more of the same. We treat the on-site consumption endorsement like we do with the licenses. We don't charge. And then moving on to
Chris,
page, yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I had a question about that. Someone inquired, is this one of those scenarios again where the state charges a licensing fee and we share in that revenue? Okay, thank you.
Correct.
So we are receiving compensation. It's just we're not applying a fee.
Correct.
And has the state actually been sending us the funds?
We have been.
Wow, what an amazing thing.
Thank you, Jen.
All right, moving on, page 9. Jump down to section 15 and 108306. This is probably the section that the group spent the most time revising and rewriting. In the on-site consumption endorsement, we tried to make this easier to understand, and please tell us if we didn't. So really what we do is we lay out a modular approach to applying the on-site consumption endorsement. The preamble in section 1 really just says that all of the details are to follow. So if you turn to page 10, actually I guess it's the bottom of 8, 9, and top of page 10, we spell out the types of on-site consumption endorsements, and the fail-safe mechanism, or the kill switch, as we described last week, to not allow on-site consumption by inhalation we accomplish that by simply removing it from the list of approvable consumption methods. That's what the section A, the very last line of page 9 covers. That's where that used to be. So we've reserved it. In the state regulations, that's where on-site consumption of bud exists. We've removed it so that when the assembly deals with the issue of smoking, we can come back and just plug it in.
Okay, question. Just on the drafting, so this section 15 says, adding a new section to read as follows, but we have some deletions. So this is a modification of a previous.
This is a Scrivener's error, Mr. Chairman. You should not have seen that stricken language. That's actually in the draft, and we didn't catch the track changes when we printed it for you.
Okay, so new section, that should technically, the crossed out stuff and the underline really should, whatever's underlined, so that, ignore that. Right.
Correct.
So,
No,
Wait,
the underline is still good.
we were debating the language.
But it's still good, but that actual underline is not.
Right, the
So,
whole section is new, so you won't see any.
Okay. It was a typographical error, but it did lead to a very good discussion on policy that Dean wanted to kickstart with the group.
Okay, are we doing that now?
Sure. So first, the new section, you add a new section to code. You don't underline the whole thing. It's all new. There's no reason to add. So that's the slave drafting convention. What you see here in markup, I guess in paragraph A1 here on page 9, was sort of a debate we had about A1 authorizes whoever has the endorsement to sell the line what products for these things. But it really just describes what's in the rest of this whole section, right? So we debated whether we should just say in compliance with this section because the details are laid out later, or have the rest of this that's strike through the paragraph. That's what we had initially. And I guess in one view, it's helpful to have up here in the beginning an area designated as consumption separated and so forth, so that it just draws your attention at the beginning of the section, the whole endorsement section, as to what some of the basic requirements are, rather than just saying in compliance with the rest. We have to look through the detail. I guess one significant point is having a separate ventilation system is here if consumption by inhalation is to be permitted. So it sort of draws your attention right at the beginning that you might have an endorsement where inhalation is permitted with a venting system, or where there's no inhalation, maybe you don't need a venting system. It sort of gives you a good idea of what the issues are, or the different ways you could go with having an endorsement area at the beginning. So we usually commonly it's just, I think either way works fine in terms of interpreting the law. It's more of a drafting style for readability, for going to try to understand this.
And given the discussion last week, Mr. Chairman, and we want to minimize confusion both prior to adopting consumption by inhalation and after. So as Dean explained, having all of that clarifying language up front is helpful. I think my opinion would be it's more helpful when we're actually moving forward with on-site consumption. And perhaps when Section 2A is restored or created, that would be an appropriate place for it there. So again, that it's very, very clear of about the requirements for on-site consumption. But we'll leave this up to the body.
To that effect, Mr. Chairman, would we want to maybe just cut it then after either, like it sounds like separated from the remainder of the premises? It looks like we could, I mean, I like the idea of being very clear up front that it's separated from the remainder of the premises. It looks like part of that's going to apply regardless of which type of consumption, and then you could reserve the rest for A. So that it is very clear what we're talking about.
Okay. I think your point is top of 11C1. So they took it out of there and they added it to these requirements.
Okay,
Exactly.
thank you.
So and that was our discussion on this. That process I would certainly provide information to you, but it's not really technically in this document. That was because this is a whole new section, so you
Okay.
might have that change.
And
anyway, but that information, am I right? That's
You're correct. It's spelled out in excruciating detail in a later section.
And just so I'm clear, the Title 21 references here, the reason there are two of them, they're the same section just for the different old code and new code, right?
That's correct.
Thank you. So, because the downtown for the new members has the old Title 21 land use rules, and so you have to say it twice.
That's correct. If you remember. That's good. Good call. Okay, any other thoughts? So your point is we have presumably potentially reserved for consumption by inhalation, but the rules for that are already here. So to add that in is simply change that one line.
That's correct. It's designed. The code is designed to be modular in that way, so that when the community has that debate, if it agrees with on-site consumption by inhalation, this is where it would go. It's an approach that we've taken throughout multiple draftings of municipal code as it relates to marijuana, because there are many provisions that either were not known at the time or were not adopted locally at the time. So reserving sections is the easiest way to draft it and to come back and deal with it.
So we have, if consumption by inhalation, you need ventilation system. Does the state code, I thought they said you ventilate no matter what.
Through the chair, in 99 out of 100 references to on-site consumption, they do add that modifier if allowed. There was one or two that they didn't, and it led, I think, a lot of people to believe that it was absolutely mandatory. I, of course, will defer to Jed behind you on clarification, but that's our read of it.
Okay, let me go to Dean, then Jed. Dean?
Yeah, so when you review state regulation, there are a section that corresponds to ours. It's 40AC 306-370, and they refer to ventilation in 3 or 4 places. But only one of those places it says if inhalation is to be permitted, then ventilation and so forth. So when you read it, it sometimes seems like ventilation is required in all instances, and in just one place, it's like if ventilation is to be permitted, consumption by inhalation. So I think.
Okay, good. Because it doesn't make sense otherwise. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Good. Okay, any other thoughts? Jed?
Yeah, Jed Smith, AMCO. I think we are aware that I don't think it was the intention to, if someone applied for an endorsement that was going to be only for edibles, that we were going to require them to have a special ventilation system for that. I think we're aware that that's a problem, and we'll probably be correcting that, soon.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? Okay, Chris?
Okay, so I guess the final, before we turn the page, the final direction we're looking for from the body is whether or not you're comfortable with what we've drafted, where we leave out those modifiers that are stricken out, or if you want them in there. I think our recommendation is leave them out, but we'll look to you for guidance so that we can draft accordingly.
You mean in this A1?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. choices whether you want the underlined short phrase or you want that omitted, and you want the strike-through longer phrase that describes what's in the rest of the section.
But it's all addressed later.
Correct.
Any issues.
So it's just in a different section, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we just take that language out since it's addressed in other sections.
Okay, will do.
And I would maybe not traveling with this, but I would like to see what would 2A look like. Would you just say consumption by inhalation is allowed?
So in previous drafts, it actually spelled out the specific types of marijuana product that could be consumed by inhalation. But if we were to write it out fully, we may include, if, as Dean suggested, you wanted to put notice very clearly up front, we would spell out probably not only the types of marijuana product to be consumed by inhalation, but also the corresponding rules related to the on-site consumption space. If that was the direction the body wanted to go. Otherwise, if you're simply asking, how do we at some point plug in on-site consumption by inhalation, that's where it goes, and it probably would look just like the previous drafts did, where it's specifically spelled out the marijuana product type.
Any questions? All right, thanks.
Okay. Moving on. Page 10, there's no significant changes on page 10. You just want to verify that before I settle on it. Yep, no big changes on on page 10. On page 11, this is where we dive into the consumption area characteristics. To call out, I'd like to call out in particular C3. This is where we begin to address the on-site consumption area's ventilation requirements, if applicable. So the language in here, which mirrors the state regulations, is spelled out as triggered only if you are consuming via inhalation. So right now it's effectively it's a neutered provision because there is no on-site consumption by inhalation allowed. But when that is allowed, this would get triggered.
Okay, question, Chris?
Yeah, never mind.
Through the chair, wouldn't we want to just reserve these provisions just to mirror the other and have them ready to go, just for consistency's sake?
Sure. Through the chair, that's fine. We do think that based on the conversation last week from industry, that knowing upfront, because a lot of them need a lot of lead time to plan, knowing upfront what will be expected from them is helpful. I do think that this goes a long way towards providing some of that, but we're certainly open to, I guess, reserving that as well.
Do you want to follow up?
Yes, please. Would it be, when we take up the issues with smoking, could we actually be altering this in our other action? That's why my concern is that we could create something that could be inconsistent with this.
All right, thanks.
I think that there is some good reason to leave something in along this lines because it clarifies, creates clear distinction between the edible area and the other use area. And so the concern that people will have if we don't clearly state that ventilation is only required in places where you're going to be consuming by inhalation is that the inhalation requirement's fuzzy and it's kind of in other parts of the code and the state's already said you didn't quite do it right. And so the implication to the licensee would be they have to proceed forward with ventilation for their eating of a brownie. You know what I mean? And so I don't know, I'm not tied to any language, but I think stating somewhere that the ventilation requirements only refer to inhalation would be wise, right? Because that clearly tells, at least from the Anchorage perspective, potential applicants that we're not contemplating the two.
Let me go to Felix.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to that real quick, if I may.
Are you tied into that?
It is a tight-end discussion, yes.
Let's go ahead and then you can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I agree both with Mr. Constant and Ms. Zalatel. I believe that we should keep some language here, but be very clear that we're not presupposing making any changes before we have the full community conversation, and make it clear to the industry that there may be changes So prepare for this, but there might be other things happening as well.
So just in response, Mr. Chair, there are subsequent sections that will go into more excruciating detail about ventilation systems. Again, all couched with the caveat of if on-site consumption by inhalation is to be allowed or be permitted. So that there is going to be a lot of detail in these code provisions about that, that all support leaving it in C3. But if the committee wants to have that reserve, we certainly could. I personally think it's helpful for industry to start understanding the rules ahead of time to facilitate, faster turnaround when and if it ever is permitted.
All right, thanks, Mandy.
I was going to offer also, it's in the state regs, so if the body wanted to just make that section all reserved, it is in the state regs, so it is required if they have the ventilation requirement kick in. It is through the state also, so.
Okay, does the state, do we mimic their wording here?
I feel like we clarified it a little bit more, but as Jed said, it's the same idea.
We made it better.
Well, that was what Jed said, Mr. Chair, is that the state's not quite clear on what they're stating. I think we would be wise to be more clear, at least in that section. I haven't read the rest to know if we should just reserve it, but at least in one place, I think we should clearly state that before edible consumption, ventilation isn't required.
This language that we're looking at in C3, it's exactly the same as the state regulation in 370 C3, except that first phrase, if consumption by inhalation is to be permitted in our code, and it was improved. But the state does use that phrase in another part referring to ventilation. So, but the rest of that is exactly what the state reg says for C3.
Okay, thank you. So I have a little concern, because if we put this in here, then their standard will be visible smoke, remove visible smoke. And we're getting comments from public already that someone, no smoke, no way, no how, not even one little smallest particle of smoke, which is quite a distance really from no visible smoke, because there's particles and stuff you can't see, but you can still smell it. And then is that, so, and for Jeff, is this visible smoke? Is that your operating thing? How's our smoke-free ordinance? I can't see the smoke, then it's not there.
But we don't really have this issue because we don't allow smoking inside. So I honestly don't have an answer for that right now.
You know what? And I know Choco Charlie's has a smoking area.
But it's
There
not
is smoking area.
enclosed, it's outside.
Yeah.
It could be, there's like rules from the building department. I think it's 70% has to be, can only be closed up. It has to have gaps at the top and bottom and fans. And so there's all kinds of rules. And in that case, we haven't really, because smell is not such an issue with tobacco smoke. It doesn't carry very far. It doesn't really bother people as much. Well, next to a bar, but it's outside. It's got to be outside. It can't be inside. And employees are not allowed to go in that area when it's operating or in use. So we haven't really had that problem. I guess you could say we consider what visible smoke is versus smoke in general, the stuff you can't see.
Right. So just following up on that real quick. So this would work. Visible smoke. You could go in. You could say, "Hey, I can see it." That's not working.
I'm not sure that would work.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, this is external, not internal. This is, the way this reads, it's a ventilation system that directs air outside of the building, and the visible smoke criteria applies to external.
Yep. Okay, so in the room, there could be some.
I would imagine.
I believe that at the last meeting, when we had the building official and we had code enforcement here, they had discussed and described their methods and that their technologies are limited at this time. And so I think we can all just presume from their expert testimony that at this time there isn't a great way to make a test.
Maybe. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you notice the very last line, it says, to remove the visible smoke adequate to eliminate the odor at the property line, which is, standard. And so I think it's covered. But.
So, and then leading to another comment we've been getting too is, okay, well, someone goes in there and they have a heart attack or some emergency, and our EMTs have to go in and it's full of pot smoke, or the police have to go in. So, suggested been, okay, can you clear it in 3 minutes? So you call the cops, and you turn on the thing on max, and you tell everyone to quit smoking. By the time the cops or EMTs get there, it's completely exchanged the air. It's this, but we're going to get requests for this when we go to public hearing, even if we don't allow smoking. We're going to get comments on this, but we should be prepared for that. Maybe we'll head that way. And if all we say here is remove visible smoke outside of the smoking area, that's a much lower bar, and you'd have people in the industry perhaps preparing for that. But then we go through and we allow on-site consumption, but we have a much higher ventilation standard, and everybody's put in the wrong equipment.
So, Mr. Chairman, to that point, I haven't spoken specifically with APD or AFD, but I know for purposes of building safety or development services, we've talked extensively about this, particularly about exposure during inspection, for example. We plan on investing in the equipment necessary for us to do that, so that we're not exposing employees to secondhand marijuana smoke for routine inspections, et cetera. Knowing what I know about firefighters, they have breathing apparatus. They probably can handle this too in that way. The cops I can't speak for, but we certainly could ask those questions.
The firefighters do, but EMT don't wear that when they go out. But, they don't. And that would be a more likely situation.
We can ask those questions.
Anything else, Chris?
Yeah, just as I have said before, having spent hundreds, maybe thousands of hours in a very sweaty and kind of disgusting yoga studio, I've been in a room that goes from 105 degrees and filled with more sweat than you can ever imagine to clear air within 2 minutes. When they turn the fans on, it's incredible. And so we don't want to presuppose we can or we can't, but there are methods that we could get to. And I think that the core rub of this question is because we can reserve. So we're talking about something we're not even proposing to regulate here, but that we can communicate that for consumption, edible consumption, you don't need ventilation. I think that's
I understand that, but when we put this in, I mean, the point made, we should have this in there so they know what could be coming,
Correct.
so that they prepare. But if they're preparing for a normal ventilation system and not what you're describing for yoga,
but that gets to the point that he's made that this is all, except for this line right here, if consumption by inhalation is to be permitted, is the state standard, right? And so
we
that
can have higher standards.
You're right, we can have higher standards, and however, that's a pretty good benchmark. They at least know they have to go there. And are we going to be regulating the consumption by inhalation right now, or are we doing edibles? That's
Well,
the question.
but at least do we even have this in there then? If we just say you have to have a ventilation system that pulls out the smoke, and then we go through a process at some point, year or two or months from now, and it's much higher.
And again, I think
They
the
got the
message
wrong
that needs to be there is that for consumption by edibles, a ventilation system is not required. That's what the rub is here.
So, Mr. Chairman, 2 points to that. I'm sorry to disagree with you, similar or constant. I don't think we need to spell out edibles as having a separate set of rules, because we're basically saying these are the rules that apply across the board, and then we're adding additional rules for on-site consumption by inhalation. So I don't know that we need to spell that out individually. What I would suggest to the body, so we can keep moving through the document, is we'll flag this, we'll follow up with APD, AFD, and others, and we'll come back to the group with a report on how that particular issue could be dealt with.
And look for, is there phrasing that's normal in ventilation systems to say, with the capacity to turn over the air within 3 minutes?
There is, and
20 or
we'll come back to the body with
Okay.
some suggestions.
Just one last comment. Then, while I may have a disagreement with you, I would really appreciate in your contemplations you come up with the language that communicates clearly to the industry the standard is different for non-combustion consumption, so that it's really clear. Thank you.
Okay, is it Marge?
Marge Stonke, American Lung Association. And the reason that the state regs say need to remove odor and visible smoke is that that's all that ventilation is capable of doing. And the Marijuana Control Board learned this through the whole process. The American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers has stated very clearly that there is no system that that can remove the toxins and fine particles and ultrafine particles of secondhand smoke or aerosol of marijuana or tobacco smoke. And that the only way to protect human health is to remove it, is to not allow it indoors at all.
Ryan?
I was just going to point out, John Redden with Great Northern.
John Redden, Great Northern Cannabis. I had some comments or questions on regarding page 10 in section B. I just want to make sure we have opportunity to go back and have public comment and question on that portion of this after Mr. Street has opportunity to go through, or should we do it now?
Do it now, Rod.
Well, I feel, these on section B on page 10, are these 9 points, are they taken from state regulation, all of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, for anyone, this is just, anything we do here will go through the normal full assembly public hearing.
I feel like some of these are unworkable in practice, but I guess that's an issue with the input that
If you could, like, email us or write something about like this one, it wasn't workable, because that's why it's here, that would be
okay.
At least to warn us. Question for, so the filter can't take out all the bad stuff?
Correct.
But can a filtration system pull in all fresh air?
No.
So even if it pulls in all fresh air,
There's no
there will
way
be
to
smoke in there?
March Dunking, there's no way to ventilate, filtrate, or separate secondhand smoke or aerosol.
Anita Burke with Hotbox. We have developed some technologies, with all due respect. I'd just like an opportunity at some point to share some of the ventilation technologies that have been developed for confined spaces. Our product provides that, and we're able to clear the air within that smaller space 4 times the requirement for those who have severe allergies. It may not meet like 100% no stuff, but if we're doing this, we also want to keep the space interiorly clean. People aren't going to want to sit in a smoky space, if you will, if we get to inhalation. And I would just like to open the door to be available to talk about some of those technologies that might meet the requirements. Certainly not to the level of fresh air, I agree with that, but I would like an opportunity to share that information and get talking about what technologies are available. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to mention 2 things. One is we're going to have this conversation again about ventilation because we're not designed for inhalation yet. That's not authorized in section A2. So when we amend A2A to replace reserve, authorized to sell marijuana in urban parks ventilation, do this again. And then the second thing is this kind of illustrates how I think an endorsement de facto, the way it's set up, you're going to have 2 different types of endorsements. Although we are trying to have one endorsement for on-site consumption, you're going to have one that's, edibles only, you don't need a ventilation system. And then you're going to have those that need a ventilation system under C3. So I think just de facto you have 2 different types here. Unless you want to require ventilation for all on-site consumption areas, edibles, smoking or not. So.
Okay, good, thank you. Right, Chris?
I lost track. Oh, page 11. I'd like to call out section D1B, and this is again reference to the operating plan. And as we've heard other people mention, the operating plan will cover in great detail a lot of the ventilation, how they plan to meet a lot of the ventilation requirements. So in here, in this mirrors the state regulations. They're broken out on some of those criteria, including signed and approved systems designed by a licensed engineer, and then sufficient to remove visible smoke, designed so there's no visible smoke in the retail area or at the lot line. Specifically, what I think that means is there's no smoke leaking into the retail area, not that if you look through the security window, you can see smoke in the room. And then on page 12, consistency with building codes, etc. Section C is a new addition correcting the Title 21 references for outdoor consumption. just making sure that outdoor consumption areas comply with the zoning regulations related to outdoor areas. And then we just re-lettered the remaining items, D through F. Unless there's any questions or Dean wants to comment, we can move on. Dean?
I just wanted to point out that here, D1B, small Roman numeral 3, at the bottom of page 11, designed so there's no visible smoke in the retail area or lot line. That's our improvements on our local level, and you know, that section isn't in the state regulation. Something about it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Pete?
Thank you. So, and I'm looking at page 11, C2, and it's talking about smoke-free area for employees to monitor the consumption. Do we need to mention that they're allowed to use video to monitor that so that they don't have to be present in the room? Or is that just assumed?
Through the chair, that would be fine, I guess. I think we would interpret a video monitoring system as being smoke-free. But if you would like to have that added, we certainly could.
Just
Could. I think monitor encapsulates everything.
We feel the same.
okay. All right, just wanted to bring that out.
So we hopefully be done in 10, 15 minutes, Kathy.
Kathy Gleason, just to clarify, so on C3, at the very end, it does reference adequate to eliminate odor at the property line. But then in B, it doesn't reference elimination of odor. It just talks about the visible smoke and so forth. So is that, am I missing something here, or?
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe the catch-all for that is on the top of page 12, which would be sub-item IV, sub-item 4, the requirement for applicable building codes and ordinances. And I think we would argue that the requirement that odor not be detectable from beyond the lot line that exists in current code would be applicable here.
I would point out that C sort of describes the characteristic, right, ventilation consumption area. Subsection D, the first line, is the applicant has to include these things. So for ventilation, the application needs to have the mechanical engineer signature, right? So that's what you submit to the application. That's why it might seem a little redundant. They address kind of a different thing. And subsection C, all of this is also referenced in Title 21, which we'll get later. So the planning department, when they do the plan review, they have to look at and see if what's submitted complies with these characteristics and see what you can.
Okay. Thank you. And just one last reference. This is about the operating plan as well. So I think because the requirement that exists in C3, if you're coming in with an operating plan under D1B, obviously you need to demonstrate your operating plan conforms to C3. So I think we're covered in that.
Okay, sorry, Chair. Kathy Gleason, I just think redundancy would not be a bad thing when, again, from a public reading perspective, to specifically mention that or include that. Because it includes specifics about visible smoke, so you could eliminate that as well. Because it's mentioned in C3, it doesn't need to be mentioned in C3, but you do. So to be consistent, if you're going to get specific, I would include odor in that.
Okay, we will consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm back on page 12. And rounding out Section D, we're moving on to Section E. Section E has no changes from the last time. These are all pretty cut and dry copy and paste from the state license. Moving on to page 13, these are some amendments to existing code. Beginning with 1080-310, we're just simply adding the municipal endorsement to the list of types of licenses that fall under the prohibited acts. And then item 4 is a new one, and this is to prohibit intoxicated or drunken persons to enter or remain on the licensed premises.
Intoxicated means stoned?
That's my question too.
Yeah.
It's a little convoluted. We copied at the end of this document. You see definitions. There's a definition added, and we kind of copied what the state did related to definition of intoxicated in the criminal code. I passed out a list of definitions at our last meeting to help understand what that means. I think that short answer, yes, is correct.
Mr. Chair, stoned is a slang term. Intoxicated.
I said, I want to make sure we all understand.
But, so I do want to talk about this a little bit more. I think most members of the public would be surprised to find out that it's illegal to be intoxicated in a bar. Technically, they're not supposed to serve you anymore. I think people understand that when you enter, you're not supposed to be already drunk, but of course that's not how it works in the real world. But isn't there a little bit of a catch-22 here? Because I think members of the public understand that if we have someone who's very high going into a retail establishment, they can, probably should stop them. But if we're giving them a safe place to consume the marijuana, is the implication then that they're going to consume it, and then as soon as we can somehow ascertain that they are intoxicated on the effects of marijuana, then they'll be asked to leave the establishment?
So through the chair, I see Dean digging in his bag to pull out the state regulations, I assume. But this all ties back to the state regulations on how you define an intoxicated individual, and in relation to the liquor industry and how that is treated. There is training that is provided to servers in alcohol establishments so that they can identify what intoxicated means. I don't know why I just put that in air quotes. What intoxicated means. And the definitions that they use really are all based on the assumption that someone is free to imbibe, but as soon as they imbibe to the point where they lose the ability to walk, speak clearly, make decisions rationally, etc., that servers be trained to identify that and know when to cut someone off. In the marijuana retail world, I think we're taking the same approach, which is it'll be up to the establishment to monitor patrons, both incoming and current patrons. If people reach a point where, I don't know, they're falling asleep in their chair, for example,
sure.
I think that's a clear indication probably that the retail establishment would say that's enough.
Thank you for that, Chris. And I can see on page 16 there's a reference to AS 1181 900B35, which I assume is the definition for intoxicated. I don't think we have that in front of us today. I think it's worth thinking about. We are trying to regulate marijuana like alcohol as much as practicable, but there are differences in the effects, right? And I think just the definition you just said right there, someone can be drunk and not exhibit any of the things you just did. And we also get all these, PSA to say, buzz driving is drunk driving. There's this sort of drive to conflate all levels of intoxication to the same thing. But again, in the real world, that's not how it works. People are intoxicated to varying degrees at basically every establishment that sells alcohol, including all restaurants where people drink a glass of wine. You're intoxicated to a certain degree. So I just want to make sure that we understand that, and that it's some level of intoxication that does what you say, like if they're slurring their speech, if they're unable to function, if they are falling asleep, fine. But we're creating on-site consumption, and there are going to be people who are high and sitting quietly and listening to music and talking to others and whatever else.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not sure how we have that conversation exactly, but I guess the first step is seeing that definition for intoxicated.
And let me read to you, so that reference to state statute is kind of circular because you go to state statute that says an intoxicated person means somebody who's intoxicated. Okay,
sure.
Great, thanks for that help.
Sure.
But I think you get a little bit more substance out of the Title IV definition of a drunken person. And a drunken person means a person whose physical or mental conduct is substantially impaired as a result of the introduction of an alcoholic beverage into the person's body, and who exhibits those plain and easily observed or discovered outward manifestations of behavior commonly known to be produced by the overconsumption of alcoholic beverages. In layman's terms, a drunk person is somebody that you recognize as being drunk. And it's up to the responsibility, in the case of the liquor industry, the responsibility falls to the licensed servers.
Sure.
Thanks. Just thinking on Forrest's point, maybe if I need to learn more more about the definition, but it's not. So you're saying they should be allowed to stay there, but you could say to enter or be served on the license. So once they're proven to be high, you don't serve them anymore.
Correct.
Yeah. And that kind of gets, but you can stay there.
Yeah, it might not be changed from remain to be served. I think also what was interesting about the definition you just stated was substantially. The word substantially is doing a lot of work there, and I think it's important that it be understood. And that drunkenness, that statute that's only for alcohol. And so I don't know how the state statute gets around that. The new state regulations on marijuana. If they reference intoxicated, and intoxicated just says you're intoxicated, and then they're using drunkenness, but drunkenness is only for alcohol, then I think we need some further definitional work.
I'm sorry, I have to go for a committee meeting that starts in 30 minutes downtown, so I hope to see you all. Sure. I'm gonna head out.
Takes you 30 minutes?
I got a
He's the chair.
meeting, so. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Mark, briefly.
So that gets to the Mark Butler, community organizer. That gets to the crux of public concern about on-site consumption of marijuana. My understanding is that marijuana did not pass in Anchorage proper as a statewide vote. So there isn't necessarily as much support as people in the industry feel. But if they're so stoned, or whatever the appropriate word is, that they can't stay inside anymore, then they go out and hop in their car and drive amongst all of us. That public danger is what people are concerned about right now, across the board, whether it's needles from the needle exchange in the parks, people cleaning up the parks, whatever it is. This is the big, public safety is the big issue right there, right now, across the board. And the non-smoking part passed almost 2-1 in favor of clean air. So if you break that, you're going against the will of the people 2-1. And I don't think there's a politician here who had an opponent in this election who won their election by 2-1. So think of that.
Thank you. Jake Warden, Canabasca. I'd also like to point out one of the glaring differences I see is that in the alcohol industry, remaining on the premises is because they can go up and buy more. But in the marijuana industry, they're limited to 10 milligrams upon entrance, right? So if they go and they get high and they're intoxicated, there's no reason why they can't stay there because they don't really have access to any more products, right? And we want to be able to create an environment where people feel safe and they don't have to be forced out.
Great, we'll look at that.
Just real quick, I just want to share, Anita Burke, I just want to share some development information. TIPS is an international intoxication program that people behind the bars use, other folks use. They are in the process of developing a marijuana intoxication way to assess that, both for people serving and in the general public and also with police officers. So as you struggle with this, know that these approaches are emergent and that folks are working on them.
Thank you.
They've been working on that for a while.
Darn it, as in this industry, isn't everything take a little bit longer than we thought? Yeah.
Yes, but we won't take longer because we have a meeting at 11 at City Hall. So, Chris.
Before we get close to the end, Dean took us into page 13. I'll just continue from there. These are all additions, moving on section 17, these are all additions to existing 1080 through 355 that reflect the state regulations. So this is not editorial on our part. Section 18, again, same story. We're just adding on-site consumption endorsements to a list of reports on notice of violations. Same with section 19, and same with section 20, and section 21, and 22, and 23. So really, the remainder of the document, until we get to page 16, is just simply updating these provisions to include the on-site consumption endorsement. Page 16 is where we have the definitions section, and this again comes from state statute. We're also, as you can see in the note to the code revisor in the preamble to section 25, we're asking that this section of code be rewritten in alphabetical order. It's currently not in alphabetical order. Most definition sections are, so that you can find definitions easier. So we're recommending that as part of these additions. And then all of those definitions that follow as new or modified are because of the state regulations. Section 26 is a new section. This was Dean's good catch, as always, that we actually need to update our fine schedules as part of this because some of these violations do carry fines. So Section 26 is an update to Title 14 to include the fines that go with offenses listed in the licensing sections above. So the bottom of page 16, top of page 17, that's what that is. And then after that, there's nothing left in the document.
Thank you. Any comments?
Just a small note. If we do choose to change that remain to be served, then we need to change it in the fine schedule as well.
Thank you.
Language in the fine schedule.
Okay, we've got a few minutes. Title 21. Do we have time?
Yeah, we do. Ryan's fast.
Look at me real fast.
So real brief. Sarah?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment, maybe to correct the record. I believe there was a question earlier about whether the endorsement fee would be shared from the state to the municipality. And Alaska Statute 1738-200C that only specifies license application fees, new and renewal license application fees. So I would disagree with the interpretation that the endorsement fee would be shared with the municipality.
We might have to set up
Yeah, we might ask them to clarify that. Or to do it, not to clarify it, just split it with them.
And
Thank you.
just for informational purposes, for those of you of the younger generation, back when I was growing up, my parents and grandparents used the term stone drunk. So the term stoned actually originated from alcohol consumption. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, is it you?
No, it's actually Ryan.
Ryan?
All right, so thank you. Yeah, if you'll grab your draft of the Title 21 regulation changes, this is largely unchanged from the last meeting, so I'll just point out the corrections that were made. So first correction would be on page 3, lines 6 and 7, and that just specifies that on the site plan that we received for a special land use permit that they have to denote where the outdoor marijuana consumption areas are. Indoor marijuana consumption areas would just be shown on the floor plan. So, and then jumping down to page 43 through 40.
Just real quick, wasn't there a question Dean wanted to ask in section 9 on the modifications?
Section 9.
Yeah.
So in modifications, we made sure that there needs to be review if there's addition of indoor or outdoor marijuana consumption areas. So see lines 39 to 45.
Which section?
Sorry, we're in section 9 modifications, subsection A, 4C.
Page 3? Oh, the big.
Yeah, sorry, page 3.
Line 39.
Line 39.
And I wanted to point out we made sure to include 9A with a line at the top because it already covers the 20% change in area. Sees any additional for the consumption area, 20% of consumption by nation not previously approved. We wanted to make sure that was highlighted here. So if you get an endorsement for consumption edibles only, which is all we're going to allow now, but later we want to add inhalation, it's pointed out here that you're adding inhalation not previously approved, or you need to go back to the planning department.
And that was in response to comments from last week's meeting that we heard, so that people that apply for an on-site consumption permit now to get edibles, there's a process by which we know when people switch to inhalation.
Okay, and that captures that.
Yeah.
Turning the page to page 4, the next edit would be lines 18 through 21. And this goes back to the discussion last week. The previous wording was if an endorsement is suspended or revoked, the associated license may not be, or may not need to cease operations as determined by the director. And we had changed that to put it in line with current language to make sure that it goes through its due process and that it isn't this sort of arbitrary, yes, you need to shut down or you don't. And we don't want to make sure that we have authority over that. then going forward to page 6. I did want to touch on the parking requirements. I know there was some concern about that number at last week's meeting. I did have a meeting with the planning director as well as the municipal traffic engineer on Tuesday to discuss that. And we are all in agreement that 1 per 100 is a sufficient parking requirement for these facilities. I do have a couple examples for that. I ran some numbers. If you had a retail facility that was 3,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, 1,500 square feet, this room is just a hair over 500 square feet. So at 1 per 100, that's 5 parking spaces. And we currently have probably 35, 40 people in this room. And we probably all drove here today in our own car. So that's one thing to consider. If you had a 3,000 square foot facility and you added a 500 square foot on-site consumption area, that would change your parking requirement by 3 spaces. So it is in 3 additional parking spaces they may not have on site, but it's not 20 spaces. It's not 25 spaces.
But that wouldn't be applicable in the downtown area, right?
Correct. That would not be applicable in the downtown.
Okay. Of course.
We're just doing it again.
Yeah.
We're subsidizing the hell out of cars, and we're forcing private industry and us to spend a bunch of money.
Get a thank you from Toyota.
It could have been spent on almost anything else.
Chris?
Yeah, we had a lot of internal debate on this. I tend to err more on the side of less parking, but I lost this argument because what we did is we looked at, or what the traffic engineer and planning department did is they looked at some comparable use types, cafes, things like that, and found out that, yeah, based on a similar, what we would imagine to be a semi-similar use type, that these kinds of parking requirements should at least be considered at the outset.
Yeah, and we envision these areas to be social areas. I kind of came up with the term of like factory consumption. It's not like you're going to have a line of people and say, okay, you're on the clock 30 seconds, pop your brownie and you're out of here. And when you think about it too, I've got a fully stocked liquor cabinet at home, but yet I still go out to restaurants and bars with friends and have a drink. I envision these operating in the very same manner.
Okay, we have a couple minutes.
All right, a couple more minutes, I can do that. Still on page 6, dropping down to line 34. This is just an old code addition or amendment to specify that outdoor marijuana consumption areas have to be detailed on the site plan. And then just one note, turn the page 7, lines 15 through 17. This is an old code provision, but we do need to add the consumption via inhalation provision that we added to new code. That was something I had missed, but we'll add that to the next draft. And then still on page 7, jumping down to lines 47 through 50. This is just the same provision to make sure that the endorsement is suspended or revoked, that it goes through due process to determine whether or not it should remain valid. Then going to page 8, we just added section 7 on lines 32 through 34. And what this does is it waives Planning and Zoning Commission review of this ordinance, given that Planning and Zoning Commission has not reviewed marijuana ordinance since 2016. Largely been kept out of it.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so what do we do with these? Who's my committee?
I thought the intent was not to make a recommendation on passage, but just have these worked into a place someone needs to introduce them.
Right, I think is that where we are then. So you're going to make, but we had a few changes.
Yeah, if I may, through the chair, we've got a number of comments that from today's session that are very helpful for both Title 10 and Title 21 is mostly baked. Thank you. That's a good joke. So we'll come back next week if it's scheduled, or the following week with Title 10, and at that point we'll be ready to get them in the assembly workflow.
So do you want to bring it back here with the changes, look at it quickly again, then introduce, or you want to introduce what we have, make the amendments, or have you give it a shot and then you want to get in the pipeline quicker?
When's our next meeting?
23rd.
So if we bring these back to the committee next week, Mr. Chairman, and the committee has no further edits at that time, we can actually get it into the case that day, and then put it on the regular agenda for the first May meeting.
Do we have, what's our schedule?
Our next scheduled one isn't until the 2nd, but we have time to where we could schedule one for the 25th if you like.
Is that okay?
I'll be with the National Guard out of state and unavailable, but if you can get a quorum, if you get other folks appointed.
Can you may get that done fairly quickly, so we can email it around for us, we'll have it and send us comments.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the changes are going to be fairly minor, except maybe the definitional issue. And I think whichever way we go, it sounds like the earliest it can realistically get introduced would be the first May meeting, which I think is what we talked about before.
Even if it were approved today, Mr. Chairman, that is the earliest you'd see it.
So let's schedule a meeting for same time, same place next week to look at those changes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So beyond review by this committee, I also suspect we will have a work session or perhaps a series of work sessions to deal with the myriad of public safety issues that members of the public have, as well as I think we'll probably continue our discussion on parking and the philosophical difference of including ventilation or inhalation or adding the reserved, bringing that to the full body in those work sessions.
That can all happen at introduction.
Anything else? Okay, so done with this, we got that. Public comments, if you haven't commented already, we got a split.
Yeah, we're going to be late.
I'll be very brief. These during the board meetings, sit down 14 minutes. Number one, there was no agenda for this meeting. As far as being on the website, how does people know what items are going to be discussed? It's like a lottery. Well, they have to show up as something that will be interested in. And that should be the way to connect. And that's all I have to say except this. You have 6 members of the Assembly here, which is great. But you got an important issue dealing with sport that's coming up at 11 o'clock. So I'm sure the public and yourselves have this kind of short window to get over to the next place. Thank you very much. We're 2 minutes and 21 seconds to spare.
I'm working on a resolution from the Assembly to request 25-hour days for Assembly members. I expect it will have as much impact as any of it.
Thank goodness we're only working part-time.
I didn't want to embarrass myself on this last week, but we weren't here. No, I had to. We had to chat. See you over there. The raging contingent. That's right. I was doing my part of that.